Yay! Okay,
Great.
so we'll start all over. I want to welcome you to the Knowledge Management Task Force meeting. My name is Sheila Jackson. I'm with the, what am I with? I'm with TOPS. Yeah, I work for the Corp, but it's actually the TOPS project. Sorry, I'm reading the chat and trying to talk at the same time. Never a good combination. Patrick, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Patrick. I'm with the TOPS program.
All right, good. And so today we have a really, really exciting meeting planned. I just can't tell you how geeked out I am about how to hold successful share fair. Before we get to that, I'd like for us to just go around and introduce ourselves, just say our name, organization, and maybe briefly talk about one type of KM initiative you're working in on your organization, or maybe just something interesting you've read or heard about KM. So I'll go ahead and start. You know me, I'm Sheila Jackson with the TOPS program. And one of the things I'm very excited that we're working on here with the KM Task Force is putting together a facilitation series for you guys to attend. We have in-person facilitation. Patrick's going to be doing one virtually, and then we're also working on for hybrid. So when you have people such as this one that are in the room, plus also on a webinar. Okay, so Patrick, you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm actually working on pulling together a webinar next month for a web event. There's been a lot of requests in people in core group. Core group is this, for those of you who don't know, it's this network of people who work in global health, and it's people from across different organizations, and there are working groups within core, and the working groups are all topical. So, there's one on malaria, there's one on HIV, there's one on social behavioral change, but all under the guise of global health. And there's been some kind of requests from people to get a better understanding of how to use webinar software and stuff to hold online meetings that are really engaging. I think a lot of people have trouble envisioning low-tech ways, especially of using web platforms to have a really engaging meeting. And so I think we're basically going to do like an event in mid-June that kind of models that and looks at different techniques or things that you can do to try to increase engagement. So that's something that I've got in the works and trying to plan out.
Okay. All right, and then shall we talk with Aaron first? Aaron?
So Aaron, I'm not sure if your mic is unmuted, but for everybody on the call, in case you haven't used the mic system before, that's okay. So I'm just going to say this for the benefit of everybody in case others are having certain things. So if your mic is working, you can use that. There's also a dial-in option. In order to activate your audio, you're going to want to look to the top of the screen, and you'll see a green speaker icon, and that's so that you can hear audio. And then to the right of that is a little telephone icon, and you can use that telephone icon either to get the dial-in number or to activate your computer microphone. And then Jesse just posted the dial-in number and the conference code to the chat box, so you can use that to dial in if you want to use your phone instead. Feel free to use your chat box, but we'd also love if you could call in because we'd like to have more conversation.
Aaron, is that you?
Hi, yes.
Okay, please go ahead.
Sorry, I came in a little late. What is it that you just want me to introduce myself?
Your name, your organization, and also could you just tell us briefly something you're working on, like a KM initiative, or maybe something new you recently heard about knowledge management that you would like to share?
Sure. Erin Shea with the Save the Children Department of Global Health in Washington. We recently developed a KM strategy, which we talked a little bit about in a recent GHKC brown bag. But one of the things that we have to dive into is the rollout of the strategy and implementation. so that's what I'm starting to
That's really
work on.
interesting. And Erin, when you get through that process, that might make a good knowledge management task force meeting presentation. Talk to us about some of maybe the lessons learned in rolling out and implementing a KM strategy. So good luck. Keep us posted.
Thank you.
Jessica.
Can you hear me?
There you go.
My name is Jessica Chen. I'm the Knowledge Management Officer at Project Concern International. And one of the things that we're talking about now is how to embed KM and learning within the project lifecycle so that there's quality program implementation. So just seeing how to nest that into a larger system.
Great, great. That sounds exciting. Thank you. And you as well, if you'd ever like to do a KM Task Force meeting. Don't be shy, folks. Let us know. More than happy to host you and help you out. How about Michelle?
Okay. Hi, this is Michelle Stern from ACDI Avoca. I'm in the Technical Learning and Application Unit, and we're actually a little bit behind some of the other groups. We're in the process of setting up, I guess, an inventory process on uses of knowledge management and knowledge management needs within our headquarters staff, and based on that, we're going to try to start developing a strategy. So we'll see what that looks like over the next few months.
Oh, yes, that's exciting. You let us know about that as well. And
Sure.
Dihida, did I say that right?
Yep.
Didia, my apologies, Didia. Didia, are you there? He is typing for a moment. I'm here, but you can't hear me. So, Vidya, would you like to very quickly in the chat box just type your organization and maybe real quickly something you're working on? Go ahead and read that out. Videos with CARE, the competitive bid unit. What is she working on?
A lot of proposals.
Yeah,
In motion
probably
these days.
swamped. And she's pairs a few KM platforms, and they are trying to evaluate the effectiveness of these platforms in communication with their country offices. That's very exciting. We're always trying to figure out how we're working or getting out there information and knowledge. This is a SharePoint-based platform to share knowledge management about new business. Okay, also very interesting. So some of the things you guys are working on sounds really interesting and really kind of moving knowledge management forward in your organizations. And like I said, you're always free to go ahead and be a presenter and run a knowledge management task force meeting. So please let us know. We would all be interested in hearing more about the projects you're working on. They're all very exciting. Also on the line, graciously taking notes for us is Jessie Mann. She is a program coordinator with TOPS, so thank you, Jessie. Really appreciate it. And Jessie's been very instrumental in helping out with webinars. TOPS has really gotten into kind of doing the webinar aspect of sharing knowledge, so thank you, Jessie. Okay, so with that, I just really want to quickly give a status of task force events and also some of the projects we've been working on. You heard Patrick and I both talking about kind of the facilitation meetings we're organizing. The in-person one will be a facilitation workshop on July 20th here in D.C. Lynette Friedman, who used to work with core groups consultant, she'll be the one, she developed the curriculum, who will be giving this. Please look for outreach for this. It will be limited to about 20 people, but if you could join us, we'd really appreciate it. And then Patrick, like he said, is also in the middle of June. We'll be having, putting on kind of a webinar talk about how to run people, have a meeting virtually. Virtual meeting, thank you. And as far as the projects, the commitment to knowledge management, the survey is now closed, and now we're looking into interviewing people to get a little bit more in-depth information on how they have fostered commitment in their knowledge in their organization. Knowledge management commitment, excuse me. If you are interested in being interviewed, please let me know, or Mariella or Harley. And Patrick, as far as the mapping goes?
Yeah, Sarah Kress and YGNO from World Vision and I have been doing a little mapping of the KM task force, and I think we have 26 responses so far, so that's great. I think we should have a pretty good, like 75 to 80% of the task force done next week or so, and then, we'll pull that together into some kind of tool or some kind of like document or something like that we can share out with all of us internally, so that we have a better sense of who's working on what, and where our work might overlap with other people in the task force. And yeah, that'll just hopefully give us a better sense of who each other are and the work that we're doing.
Okay, great. All right, so now with all that going, and there's still a lot more things going, I'm really excited that today we are getting a presentation on how to hold a successful share fair from Sarah Harlan with the Knowledge for Health Project. I can't say enough. One of the things that how I found out about this is that the Global Health Knowledge Collaborative, actually had their own webinar to talk about this resource. And I was busy at the time, so I went back and looked at it. So for all of you who are recording webinars and you think no one looks at them, I'm looking at them. And I was excited to hear they were actually developing a tool, and I immediately emailed Willow Gerber, and I said, is this out yet? She said no, but she would let me know. And so as soon as it is, I was really excited because this tool, I think, is something that's much needed, and that's one of the reasons why we're going to consider recommending it by the KM task force. And you'll notice on the agenda there's 4 criteria for recommending a resource by the KM task force. Easy to use, field-friendly, found useful and effective, successfully apply in appropriate context, and addresses a need or a gap in the practitioner community. So what's going to happen, just in case you haven't been involved in this project before, Sarah will give her presentation. After her presentation, we'll have 15 minutes for Q&A, anything you want to ask her. And then what we'll do is we'll send out a survey monkey in the next few days asking you to vote whether or not you would like to have this tool recommended by the KM task force. Okay, any questions on that so far? Does that make sense? Okay, so then without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Sarah. And Sarah, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And please let me know if at any point you can't hear me. I have my mic, I have an adapter for my mic, and sometimes it gets a little funny. So please let me know in the chat window. I think I have spoken with some of you before. I see a lot of familiar names in the chat window. But in case we haven't met before, I'll introduce myself. I'm Sarah Harlan. I'm the Learning Director with the Knowledge for Health Project at the Center for Communication Programs. And I lead audience engagement and partnership activities for the K for Health Project. And I've also been very involved and was the manager for a couple years of the Global Health Knowledge Collaborative, so I know some of you from that group as well. And I'm really excited today to be talking about share fairs and introducing our new share fair guide that K for Health has just published. I will go over some specific examples as well of some share fairs that have been put on by K for Health, the GHKC, and also a country-level project in Indonesia, and all of these share fairs informed the writing of this guide, and we'll give you an overview of some of the material in our share fair guide and how it can be used. And I look forward to any questions, and if you have questions as I go along, feel free to put them in the chat box. So just as an overview, I'll talk about the share fair guide and talk about what a share fair actually is, and how you can go about planning your own, including agenda, logistics, etc., and then give some specific examples. So this is a picture of the cover of our new ShareFair guide. It was just published a couple weeks ago, and it was really written in response to a lot of interest in the KM world for events like ShareFairs. And so we wanted to put together a guide based on the experience that we had putting together a variety of different types of events like this. And so we hope that, sharing our experience with ShareFairs will help other people put on their own events. And, as all of our materials at K4Health, this is meant to be a living document. So if anyone uses it and has feedback on how we can make it better or has case studies on how they have used it, we definitely welcome all of that information. So what is a ShareFair? Here's some basic definitions for ShareFairs. It's a participatory event that's focused on usually a single topic that involves a lot of discussion and sharing. And the aim of these events is really to provide participants with opportunities to talk about their own experience and then also learn new skills. So to really get in depth on a certain topic or project and then find ways to take that back to their office. These can be flashy, they can be structured, they can be informal, they can be 200 people, they can be 10 people. The most important thing is the knowledge exchange and sharing component. So why would you want to hold a ShareFair? Well, it's a good opportunity for people working in the same field to exchange knowledge, as I mentioned before. It gives people a structured space to share what they do, ask questions, the safe space. People talk about successes, challenges, failures, look for solutions. It can help prevent reinventing the wheel and avoiding duplication. And in a world of global health and development, we are always sharing written documents and reports, but they often don't capture that tacit knowledge that's in people's heads. They capture the explicit knowledge that you can really easily share, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's why we have an iceberg here. So most knowledge is really that tacit knowledge under the surface. That's an invisible first-person experience, and it's really hard to articulate this knowledge because it does include those skills and insights and kind of the practice and the, people's art of doing things a certain way. And so ShareFairs can be a good way to get at this knowledge. Okay, so a lot of people ask us, so what's the difference between a ShareFair and a conference? So we put together this basic matrix that just gives a little bit of an overview of the differences. And, there are a lot of different types of conferences, and I'm sure we've all been to small ones and big ones, but generally, conferences tend to have a diverse population, a diverse invitation list. So it may be an HIV/AIDS conference or a food security and nutrition conference, but it often will have people that are from the funding sector, from policymakers, program managers, etc. A ShareFair tends to be a little bit more of a specific population. So we'll talk about one that we had focused on family planning implementers, and one that we did in Indonesia focusing on district working groups. And it can be a more diverse population if the topic is specific and there's enough there that people have in common that they can really share and learn from each other. And sometimes it actually can be helpful to mix it up a little bit and have a more diverse group. But in general, the population tends to be a little more specific at a ShareFair. And the structure of a conference is a little more formal. People submit abstracts, and they might stand up in front of a room and give presentations. At a ShareFair, it's a little bit more focused on the networking component and the small groups, and it's a little bit more informal and has some more creative elements, like maybe more posters or drawing, or people might act out certain things, or have, there's more of a creative component. So that's kind of a general way that we like to distinguish the two. There are different types of ShareFairs, and I'll give an example of each of these. Different scopes, and I'll get into specifics later, but basically when you're planning, you'll want to decide what your audience is, what the scope is. Are you going to have a globally focused ShareFair, or a regional or local, or maybe even more, maybe even smaller than that? So these are just three tiers that we've included in our guide, and but they do mostly relate to cost and location as well as purpose. For some reason it keeps skipping. So this is just a little bit about the beginning process of planning a share fair. And in the guide we have tools that you can use for most of these steps. But really about 6 to 9 months before the event, it's a good idea to decide on your budget, the concept of the share fair, what dates the share fair will be held, where it'll be held, etc. And all of these logistics should be decided at the very beginning. And the objectives of the event are really important and can help determine the event's eventual success. It's important to sit down with the necessary stakeholders, whoever's planning the event, and really conceptualize what exactly you want to get out of the event. And the more specific the objectives, the better. In K4Health experience, we really have looked at our audience first and then determined what they might need out of such an event. And I'll show you some examples later. But you know, for example, in our East Africa share fair that I'll get to later in the presentation, we determined that it was really important to talk about KM as a family planning implementation tool. And so we kind of drilled that down and developed our objectives from there. So once you've decided what you'd like to do, it's usually a good idea to get a co-sponsor or collaborators, and this can often be the difference between having a small event and a medium or large event, because they might be able to help you with the cost and with the invitations and the audience, etc. And you don't want to overlap important holidays or elections, and so if you're planning to have a share fair in a country other than the one you live in, it's usually good to have a team on the ground that can tell you, you know, there's an election during that time or there's a national holiday, that kind of thing. We found that to be really helpful. And so in these first few steps, coming up with an action plan on what needs to be done will really save you from forgetting some of these basic things that need to be accomplished early on. So the next step after those things have been decided upon, it's a good idea to come up with an agenda, at least a shell of an agenda. I know all of us have developed agendas for various meetings. For share fairs, it's a good idea to have a lot of space. So we often will come up with a shell of an agenda and have some basic, you know, things that we want. We want to have a plenary at this time, or we want to have a breakout session at this time, and then really have a lot of space for connecting in between. What we've found in a lot of our evaluations is that people always want more time to discuss and network, and that's really a main goal of these share fairs, and so we try to have as much space as possible for that. We also add innovation, and what I mean by that is we try to make sure that there are creative elements and ways for people to kind of get at that tacit knowledge in creative ways. So we have things like people using drawing or using skits to communicate some of their lessons learned. And then we also, after developing an agenda and coming up with a list of potential presenters, we contact them and help them work on their presentations if needed. Other logistics, it's a good idea to send save the dates out so people can get this on their calendar. We talk about a lot of these things in the guide in more detail. I'm just going to kind of gloss over them here, but things like travel considerations, visas, shipping, things like that. We also give some examples of pre- and post-evaluation surveys in the guide in order to plan for the event, but then also find out how successful your event was to your participants. So we often will send out a pre-evaluation a week or two ahead of the meeting, and this can help us find out more about the participants. It can also sometimes help us narrow down the topics. For example, if we have a list of 10 topics but we only have space for 6, we can have people vote and, you know, really tailor it to the audience. And then we have examples of post-evaluations to really find out, did people learn from this event? What did they learn? How can they apply it to their work, etc. And then it also, we also give some tips on planning for future correspondence with participants, so things like Facebook groups or keeping in touch with them after. And I see that Patrick has a question, how do you select presenters for a share fair? I think that really varies, and it would definitely depend on the topic, but I'll give some examples in the the 3 ShareFair case studies that I'll go into, but really it depends on, you know, what is the participants' level of knowledge about the topic. So, for example, in the East Africa ShareFair, they were all family planning implementers, but might not have had as much background about knowledge management. But the goal of the ShareFair was to really share that kind of the tacit knowledge. So we gave an overview of knowledge management so that they had that in their heads, and then had people from different countries kind of you know, go into a little more depth about what they actually do in their countries and how they implement their programs, so they could kind of feed off of each other. And Sheila's asking, what are some methods for creatively delivering information? Yeah, so we have done posters. I'll talk about something we did in Indonesia, a couple of things. I'll get into that a little bit later, but that's a good question. And also the guide gets into some more specifics too. So in terms of coordinating presentations, we often work pretty closely with those that we ask to give presentations to make sure that they are that they encourage that sort of collaboration and that they give enough background but also leave a lot of space and set the right tone for the actual knowledge sharing. So for example, in the Indonesia ShareFair that we did, it was district-level family planning stakeholders, and we had somebody from the national level kind of give an overview of the new universal health care policy and how that relates to the district working groups. And we try to keep the plenary sessions kind of as brief as possible so that people can really get into the sharing component and the small group work. And we, you know, try to get the final presentations in advance, review everything, and try to, you know, not that we are going to change anything in the presentations necessarily, but for example, if we ask somebody to give a 15-minute presentation and they send in 100 slides, we might suggest that they pare down or, you know, just kind of give them a little bit of advice on, you know, what to include. And then we try to keep everything accessible so everything will go smoothly on the day of the ShareFair. Also, the guide gets a little bit into the event logistics, things like setup, you know, breaks and meals, keeping to time, having a note taker. We do have a template that we use for note taking during these events. Oftentimes when you ask somebody to take notes or you take notes yourself, I know this happens to me, I have pages and pages and pages of notes. And so we try to follow a template that really looks for like the maybe top 3 themes that emerged out of a session and kind of what are the key follow-up and key takeaways and things that you can actually take back a little more easily to your office after the event is over, and that you could also send out more easily to the participants afterwards. We've also used creative note-taking, like we had a graphic facilitator at the GHKC ShareFair, which I'll get into a little bit later. And then after the event, the guide offers tips on how to follow up with participants, sending thank you notes to presenters, how to document the event through blogging, and an event report. We have an event report template as well. And we always suggest doing an after-action review in addition to a post-event evaluation. So the evaluation would really be things that the that the participants would tell you. So things like there weren't enough breaks, or I didn't like the venue, or, you know, the Knowledge Cafe format was too brief, or something like that. The after-action review is really for the planning team to sit down and say, you know, what did we do well? What can we improve for the next time we do an event like this? And I'm sure that many of you have done those before. So this is the first example I wanted to give, and this is the Global Health Knowledge Collaborative Knowledge Management ShareFair, which occurred in April of 2013. I just had to make sure that that was the right year. It seems like longer ago than that. But it was led by the GHKC, and the Johns Hopkins Center for Communication Programs was chairing that group at the time. And we planned this really in response to the GHKC's request that we get together a group of KM specialists from across sectors and share experience, tools, lessons learned, and really reinvigorate the field of KM for global health. We also wanted to spark creativity and innovation within the GHKC to keep it from getting stale. We wanted to learn from other sectors like agriculture and business. So we invited a wide range of folks. And the overall objectives were Really it was to get the health and development KM practitioners to advance the science and practice of KM and address issues of coherence and execution. We wanted to connect and communicate collectively to address things that we care about. We wanted to share examples of what works and what doesn't work, build capacity and agency of knowledge workers. So the scope was actually fairly broad, but we did have the topic of knowledge management was specific enough that it tied everybody together pretty well. And so we ended up having about 200 participants, which broke down into about 40 small groups, and each small group had a host. And these were breakout sessions throughout the day, so they weren't 40 small groups at the same time, but there were a total of about 40 smaller sessions. And we had a plenary session in the morning and the afternoon, and it was a full-day event. Some of our share fairs were 2 days, but this one was just 1 day. And we did hire an expert facilitator as well as a team of graphic designers that documented the event for us. And this on this slide is actually the end product graphic. So instead of having a written report after the event, we had this really great graphic that we were able to share, and they created this out of the questions that came up at the plenary. They sat in a lot of discussions, and they really synthesized a lot of information to create this really great graphic. And some highlights. Oh yeah, I'm seeing that some of you were there. Some highlights were the graphics facilitation that I just mentioned. The Knowledge Cafe was really effective. We had paper tablecloths down, and people could kind of doodle and write notes, and then people came to the next table, but with the same topic, and could kind of see what other people had thought before, and that was kind of a neat way to spark some creativity and discussion. We had a marketplace, sort of an exhibit hall, but it was a little more interactive, so people could display tools that they had used that were effective and allow other people to kind of look at those tools or test them out. For example, one was the MNE, the new, I guess it's not that new now, but it was a monitoring and evaluation guide that the GHKC developed, and we had parts of that there that people could test out or give feedback on. I think it wasn't quite finalized at that point, so we offered people the chance to test out some of those things. Like I mentioned, we had breakout sessions. We had mobile polls, so we used Poll Everywhere, and we got instant feedback. So we asked people things like, do you have a KM strategy? And people would answer by texting. And so it was a pretty cool way to get a group of 200 people to answer something pretty quickly. Not everybody did it, but it was, I think, enough of a group that was really, it was effective. And I think it was also the right environment. It was a good space. We had enough breakout rooms. It was also timed really well. I think there was enough buzz around not only the event, but the topic itself that people really were engaged. So we lucked out by having it kind of at the right time. The next example I wanted to give is the East Africa Share Fair, and this was in September of 2014. It was held in Arusha, Tanzania, and I was actually not there, but so if you have very specific questions about it, I may or may not be able to answer it, but many of my colleagues were there, and it was planned by K4Health. And this was sort of, down a level in scope. So the the GHKC Share Fair was pretty broad. I mean, we wanted to ask, what can we learn about KM? Where is the KM field going? Kind of learn basic lessons learned. This one was specific to family planning and specific to using KM to accelerate progress towards FP 2020 goals in countries. So we really wanted to demonstrate to the participants how KM could enhance their family planning programs and further the goals that they have set in response to FP 2020, and to share examples of successful and effective programming that they've used to build capacity and to really make connections and foster a community. So one thing that we've been trying to do after this event is we have a listserv specific to people who were at this event that helps them connect with each other, a Knowledge Gateway listserv. So it's kind of a subset of the GHKC in a way, but it's those working on family planning in East Africa. And so we had about 50 participants from mostly East Africa. We did have some folks from the U.S., and it was a 2-day event, and the audience was program planners and implementers. It was we had an invitation list that we stuck to, and we really tried to keep it focused to that group. We felt like if it got too broad in scope, we might lose some of the focus, and people might not necessarily be able to learn from each other's experiences quite as much. And so here were some highlights from this event. We had firecracker speeches. We contacted people in advance to ask them to, talk about certain things that were going on, and then we used visual storytelling and report out. So in some of the breakout sessions, we asked the groups, rather than to just come back to the group and report out, which can sometimes get pretty boring, we asked them to draw a picture of what the group talked about, and then we had a gallery walk, and people voted on which one they liked the best, and then each of the groups reported back and talked about what their picture actually represented and what they had talked about. And so it gave people a chance to mingle and kind of get their blood flowing, get the creativity flowing. We again had a knowledge cafe. That's one of our favorite techniques. We also had a whiteboard video that one of our K4Health colleagues made, introducing what to expect on each day of the Share Fair. And we offered, while it was focused on family planning programs, we offered the perspective of people working in other sectors, which was a really nice way to mix it up. I think at Share Fairs it's always nice to have a focus, but then occasionally to bring in something from the outside to, offer another set of eyes and some fresh ideas. And we also had people talking about some of their regional initiatives and a buzz session. And some takeaways: people said that their KM experience improved after this event, their knowledge of programs in the region improved, they learned new tools and approaches, they enjoyed that it was innovative and interactive, and it was a good networking opportunity. They did say that they would like more networking opportunities, but I think you have to balance the content with the just kind of free-form mingling. And they also said that they had fun, which is really important as well. And I think that this was the slide that wasn't loading, but it was a photo of everybody at the East Africa Share Fair, very happy and smiley. So you can imagine that. So the last case study that I want to offer is kind of the third tier down, which is the smaller scale in terms of the topic. And this is a Share Fair that we did for the Improving Contraceptive Method Mix project in Indonesia, and it's a project that I work on, and it was very targeted to the district level stakeholders that work on this project. And so in terms of the number of people, it's not necessarily the smallest, but it's the smallest in terms of scope. I guess it's in terms of geographic location. So Improving Contraceptive Method Mix, ICMM, I won't go into it in too much detail, but I just wanted to mention that it is a family planning project that uses operations research and advocacy, and it has KM as one of the components as well. It's funded by USAID and Australian's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and it's located in 6 districts in Indonesia. And so sharing is a really important part of the ICMM project. We had never done a Share Fair before, though. We had worked with this project to transfer research results into advocacy activities, and we had started a listserv with the district working group members that didn't really take off just due to some connectivity issues at the local level. So we decided to get everybody who works at the district level at this project together. And we tried to call it a Share Fair. It didn't translate very well into the local language, and so we ended up calling it a sharing meeting. Everybody knew what a meeting was, and everyone knew what sharing was, so we decided to just call it a sharing meeting. And it was a really great way to find out kind of what information was in people's heads and how they could share it with each other to improve each other's work. And we also partnered, for this sharing meeting, we partnered with the Advanced Family Planning Project in Indonesia, which uses almost the same advocacy advocacy approach as the ICMM project, and so people at the district level for both projects participated. And it was a 2-day meeting in Jakarta, co-hosted by the 2 projects, and so there were a total of 11 district working groups there for about a total of 70 participants. We also invited a few key national and provincial level stakeholders there to kind of be mentors and to offer that perspective. And the project itself chose the theme, and it was partnering to win, and because they were really excited to partner with the other project. The 2 projects hadn't ever really gotten together in this way, even though they do very similar work, and so they thought that partnering to win would be an appropriate theme. So there was a 2-day meeting. The first day they used posters to really, we had like a kind of a firecracker poster session where, as you can see this woman here, they all presented kind of a main quick win and a challenge that they have been encountering in their district. And then they had the opportunity to take questions and advice and comments from all of the other district working groups. Also on the first day, we had national level stakeholders talk about important issues that would relate to the district level. For example, the role of midwives in family planning provision and the new universal health care plan. We also did this on the second day a little bit, and then the second day we had small group sessions where they could all work on their advocacy work plans together. And then they mixed up and gave advice to other district working groups. So it was a really, really interesting session. It was a really interesting meeting. And after we got feedback from the participants, these are some things that they said they would keep and change about the event. They said they loved the opportunity to work with the people from the other districts that they never get to see or talk to. They really liked having the national and provincial level stakeholders there to kind of have that broader perspective. They liked having the guided annual work plan sessions. They loved the fun activities. Somebody actually got up and sang a song that he had written about family planning. They had posters. They really got into the theme, and they liked the collaboration between the 2 projects. What they said they would change is more time for questions, more time for small groups, informal sharing. Everybody always says this at all of the share fairs. No matter how much time we put in, they always want more time to mingle. And I think that's just, you know, in my mind, I don't think that's necessarily a negative. I think it's just that they really like the idea of the, you know, the sharing component, and they want to do it more. So I don't necessarily see that as a negative, but I think, you know, it's something that in the future we probably will try to figure out how to add more networking to the event. And so just in conclusion, specifically for this Indonesia Share Fair, this meeting really encouraged learning and collaboration by bringing the projects together, planning fun activities. We will try to make the working sessions longer and have more time for informal sharing. And this is just some of the participants at the Indonesia Share Fair, not everybody. I think these are some of the, yeah, I don't remember which districts these folks are from. I think East Java. And then this is one of the creative activities that we did on the right, which is a tree that people kind of put their hopes and dreams on the first day. On the beginning of the first day, they put their hopes and dreams for their district working group, and then revisited at the end of the second day to see how those had changed or what they had learned. And so I definitely am happy to answer any questions. I also wanted to point people to some other resources if you're interested in learning more about any of these examples. Obviously, I encourage you to go to the Share Fair Guide itself. We also have a report of the East Africa Share Fair, and we have a bunch of blogs that were written about that. We have a lot of blogs from 2 years ago when we did the GHKC Share Fair, and then we have a blog about the Indonesia Share Fair. And I'm happy to answer any questions now, or if you think of them later, you can always email me.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. That was great. I really appreciate it. So now I'd like to open it up. Does anyone have any questions for Sarah? And Jessica put in there she would love to see the links to the blogs you mentioned. So if you could...
Sure. Yeah, I would be happy to. Should I send them to you, Sheila, and you can send them to the group, or what would be the best way to do that?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
So
Can we just jump in with questions?
Wait, sorry, can you say that again? Who's that?
It's Michelle. I was just wondering if we could just jump in with questions, but it sounds like you have something to say first.
Yeah, jump on in.
Please do.
Okay.
Go ahead, Michelle.
So I guess I was wondering, I often find when I'm working with a lot of my local colleagues that they haven't really had training in how to make basic PowerPoint presentations, let alone more innovative strategies of presentation. So I'm wondering if you do any coaching on that as part of these events, or how you get people to really participate in such an innovative manner. Any tips you have from that would be welcome.
Yeah, that's, I mean, that's actually fairly challenging in some settings. You know, in some cultures too, it's not really as common to have a more creative format or a more informal meeting. So I think we are kind of in the process of figuring that out. But we do offer coaching. We also, you know, we don't, especially when it's an in-country share fair, we really like the in-country teams to plan it and to really come up with the ideas, but we encourage people to keep their presentations short, and sometimes it helps. Like, for example, in the Indonesia one, we did the poster idea was kind of it came about because I think people had been to conferences, but they hadn't necessarily been to a share fair. And so we said, well, why don't we have some posters? It could be sort of like a conference, but sort of bridging that, you know, making it a little bit more interactive. And that went over really well. And people said that they wanted to have more of that, and they wanted to have fewer actual stand-up presentations next time. And I think sometimes it's just almost, you know, showing them what an alternate meeting format can look like is important, and the first meeting of this sort is always a little bit, you know, they're lessons learned for sure, but I think you know, when people aren't necessarily familiar with it, they don't know exactly what to do. So definitely coaching. It also just depends on the personalities of the, you know, facilitators, and we have been lucky to find some really great in-country facilitators who are familiar with these techniques to help out, and familiar with some KM terminology and KM, you know, techniques as well. So that's been helpful. So I would recommend, you know, if you're doing this in a country or with people who aren't as familiar with it, to have somebody who is from the setting who might be a little bit more familiar with KM to help lead it.
Thanks, that's super helpful.
Great, and then we have a question online from Jessica. How do you go about choosing specific activities during the share fair? Is there a rationale or tips we can keep in mind?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that there is a section in the guide about this and about what types of activities to choose. Again, I think it really depends on the setting, the culture, the topic. We were surprised with the Indonesia Share Fair at how much people got into the creative element, and how much, you know, they actually wanted to do. They said, next time can we do like skits, and that completely surprised me. But I think, you know, we didn't want to push it too far. We didn't want it to be too outlandish and out there, because generally the meetings that I had been to in Indonesia before were pretty much people just sitting in a room listening to one person present for an hour, and then another person present for an hour, and then maybe 5 minutes of questions. This was really outside their comfort zone. But I think, you know, the specific activities, you know, some countries or some organizations might be more receptive to that, or maybe it's a culture where people like to tell stories, and so maybe you would want to try having storytelling. Maybe you have a musician in the group that doesn't ever really get to play music at work, so they might want to, you know, kind of come out of their shell. So I think it just really depends, but I encourage you to get creative, because you never know. You know, people might respond way more favorably than you had expected, and that's what's happened in our case.
actually, Sarah, I have one.
Great.
What made you all decide to make your ShareFair experiences into a tool?
Well, the main reason was actually because internally, it actually gets back to an internal KM problem that we were having, and that, several of us had worked on these ShareFair meetings. I led the one in Indonesia, but hadn't worked on the one in East Africa. There were some people who hadn't, it was vice versa. So we wanted to learn from each other. So we were kind of putting together some of our lessons learned internally, and then we were talking about it with some other GHKC members, and they said we would love to have these as well. So we decided to kind of write it up as a guide. And we're planning another similar event that's going to be held before the International Family Planning Conference in Indonesia in November, and we're beta testing this guide as we speak. So we're going through it and actually planning our event based on the guide, and then we might have a revised version afterwards, just based on what else we want to add. And so that's kind of how it came about. It was kind of a selfish reason actually, but it turned out that we really felt like it could be useful to the larger field. And it's not specific to family planning, even though we're a mostly family planning project.
Great. Does anybody else have any questions for Sarah? Can we put them in the chat box or go ahead and shout them out?
Sarah, this is Patrick. I just wanted to underscore, it seems like there's a lot of similarities in, we do a lot of knowledge sharing events, knowledge sharing meetings is what we call them. And I really like your tool in that the steps that you all outline are very similar to what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they can be used for any kind of, planning any kind of knowledge sharing event,
Mm-hmm.
especially, day-long or multi-day types of meetings. And so I think it's nice that it breaks it down into really clean steps. And yeah, I definitely see a lot of overlap with just kind of knowledge sharing events in general.
Mm-hmm.
What we call them, what is ShareFair or
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. And then
I think
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Sarah. Sorry.
No, I was going to say that the meeting that we're planning for Indonesia in November, we're actually not calling it a ShareFair. It's more of a knowledge exchange event, or we're for a variety of reasons we're not calling it a ShareFair. But I agree that there's a lot of overlap, and the term ShareFair might not work in all contexts. As I mentioned, in Indonesia, it didn't resonate with that team, so we called it a sharing meeting. I mean, it can be called a variety of different things, but I think, a lot of the techniques are the same.
And one thing I really appreciate about the tool is if you've ever put together anything like this, you really you don't see this kind of as a skill, you just kind of do it. And, looking at your guide and how you organize and put steps, you really see that this is a process, and it's something that needs to be taught, and people need to learn how to do it in order to really put on good learning type events. So yeah, that's one thing that I really, like I said, something that we think just so, everybody take it for granted, everyone knows it, and you realize that you start putting it down to paper, doing it, that not everybody knows how to do it. I think that's really good.
Yeah.
So does anybody else have questions for Sarah or comments? Well, Sarah, I want to thank you so much for sharing this with us. And everybody else, just so you know, we will be sending out a survey monkey so we can vote whether or not to have this tool recommended by the KMTF course. So that's very excellent. So on to the next part is us talking about developing core competencies for knowledge management professionals working in international development. And so we have kind of, not a lot of people here today, but that's fine. Rome was built by 2 people as far as I understand it. But one of the things I think I wanted to start about, it was decided when TOPS began that KM wouldn't have core competencies because it kind of felt that KM usually was the skills that it took were incorporated into a job and not a job itself. And one of the reasons I'm bringing this up is because I feel at this point that KM really has evolved into its own set of skills, and it's not just strictly an add-on to a job. So I was kind of wondering, does anybody have any feelings about that? Do they think there is it is necessary to develop core competencies for knowledge management professionals in international development? And once again, you can put it in the chat box, so you can just go ahead and unmute your microphone and talk about it. I see Michelle is typing. Well, while she's doing that, Patrick, what do you think about this?
I think core competencies could be useful. I don't know if I have a formed enough opinion. I think I'd want to know more people who are actually working with developing organizations. Because I could go either way, and I think I'd want to be supportive of whatever folks.
Well, that's another good point. We actually did reach out to some people to try to get a list of their core competencies, just to see if maybe we could use those either as a starting point or building blocks. And they weren't even weren't able to get back to us. So does anyone know if their organizations have any knowledge management core competencies?
Maybe we try to pitch it to a larger group.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe because we have some people dropping off. Yeah, we met for this meeting to be an hour and a half, but it seems like people don't have that time. This is something we could go ahead and take out on the lister. And actually, one thing I wanted to do is kind of, for brainstorming what we think the core competencies are, is have everybody kind of submit those. And during the next meeting, we could go ahead and work in small groups and talk about those. So, but let's see, most of knowledge management for CARES have day jobs with KM as an add-on. I agree that we should have core competencies. I, for one, don't have any core competencies in KM, but do it on the fly. And I think that's a pretty important distinction. That kind of goes to the other. Some people just kind of do it on the fly, and then there's other people who actually, do have this, maybe have taken some courses or worked in it a long time, and there doesn't seem to be much middle ground. And I think it would be a good type of thing for us to kind of develop these. So if you're hiring someone to do knowledge management, they have to have, they need to have experience in facilitating, bringing groups together to do a consensus, and, using different methods to capture knowledge, apply it, generate it, etc. That's good. I'm glad to hear that. Which ones particularly? Can you think of them off the top of your head? I don't mean to be putting you on the spot. But I will, yeah. This form is great. Good. Good. Yeah, I think that's one of the things we've been really looking for, and is very much using the KM Task Force as a way to kind of promote and train people in the skills to do this. One of the reasons, the motivations between all the facilitation things Patrick and I are walking is that facilitation is a big skill in knowledge management. And a lot of times how people get their facilitation skills is someone just kind of puts them in a meeting to facilitate. And that's not a really good way to learn. So, I'm glad you're learning a lot from the presentations, but hopefully some of these workshops that we're having, or whether they're workshops in person or virtually, people will be able to garner more from the skills.
I think something to consider too is, for competencies, you could think of them as, as a KM professional, I have things that I want to be competent in. Mm-hmm. But then I think there's also, organizations should be looking at their teams and their organizations and saying, okay, do we, kind of across our team, do we have all these competencies met? Because there's some things you want all employees doing, or some things that you want, certain employees designated as part of their role, this or that.
Right.
You might not have a full-time KM person, but you want to make sure that kind of just spread out among your team members, you all are doing KM and incorporating it. So you can almost think of, you could think of competencies in both of those ways, either as a, okay, me as a KM professional, this is what I need, but also as an organization, as a team, we need to be thinking about how we're incorporating, KM, even if we don't have a designated staff, which is full-time or part-time KM.
And I just thought of something, the survey that the mapping project just put out, you guys asked a lot about the different types of skills we're all using. Some of that information might be a good place to start as far as developing core competencies. They will ask other people, but that might also be interesting.
Yeah, we asked about tools and activities there.
Yeah. Well, and some of that is important. Do you know how to train? What are your facilitations? And some of that, what's your involvement in community of practice, which is a way of putting, what is your skill for facilitation, bringing people together to a consensus. So, does that make sense? Sadia, do you have anything else? Yeah, I see a V up there. Nothing else. Okay, great. So what we'll do for next steps is I'll be sending out several things through the KM Task Force listserv. One will be a Survey Monkey to vote on whether or not we want to recommend the Share Fair, how to hold a successful Share Fair, and then also there'll be the notes and the link for everything. But also I'll set up something where we can go ahead and ask everybody to kind of brainstorm some skills, activities that they think would be the basis for developing core competencies for KM professionals and international development. Well, thank you so much for staying to the bitter end for us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Lydia.
Lydia, yes. And we will talk to you next month and see you before that online.
Great.
Thank you.
And Sarah, thanks for joining us.
Yes. And Jesse, thank you for taking notes.
Is, not going to be able to
Thank you for having me.